Hi everybody, this is Jake Burley, producer of Prosthetic Gods, once again invading your feed to bring you a very special live show. This episode was recorded at the Foundry in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where we were hosted by Long Now Boston, a non-profit dedicated to the exploration of deep time and long-term thinking. We hope you enjoy this live episode and, as always, thank you so much for listening.
With Nir's permission, I'm going to filibuster for just a minute to talk about artificial general intelligence and break it down a little bit so we know what we're talking about. And then Nir's going to read you poetry that purports to refute all of my points. But the artificial general intelligence idea has a number of dimensions. One is the idea that we are at the cusp now of being able to create software that can do multitude of human jobs. And that's become the new benchmark for what we might be on the cusp of with these firms, because they're trying to sell their software to other companies that want to replace their workers. So capability of replacing human labor is one definition, but now I think we're becoming acutely aware that the idea of artificial general intelligence is a grab bag for the multitude of things that human beings can do, and that in fact these things may not fit together very well in software the way that they appear to in human brains. So another thing that people have been expecting about this point of when we get, and we're clearly at the point of the Turing test, which is you can interact with one of these things and not know that you're interacting with a computer. It simulates human communication in a reasonably fluent way, and so that as a test has now been forgotten. We're well past that. We're at the point of at least philosophical zombies. That is something that acts as if it's a real person, but does not yet appear to have anything inside yet. But another step there that people expect at this point is that once you get to a human level of improvement and capable of human cognition, that you would be able to start recursively self-improving yourself, that you would be able to become an engineer to make yourself more intelligent. Now, when human beings became intelligent 1 million years ago or 50,000 years ago, whenever you put it, we didn't immediately bootstrap ourselves into godhood. So it may be that they have similar limitations when they get to that stage, or will have it now when they're at that stage. But the idea of existential risk that comes out of this field, which when I got into the field of tech ethics back in the 1990s, I immediately knew a lot of the people in this field and dismissed what we called the singularitarian cult at the time, people who were extremely worried about the eventual advent of artificial intelligence that was going to be either manna from heaven or the end of the human race. And those people, I think, have been proven more, in terms of their expectations about how quickly artificial intelligence would develop, they've been proven more right than I was at the time. I was more focused on human bioenhancement and biomedicine type of things at the time. But over the last 8 years that we've been working together, Nir and I, we've been focusing on artificial intelligence, and of course it's been an incredibly fruitful time for that. But recursive self-improvement is happening now. Artificial intelligence firms are applying artificial intelligence tools to the improvement of artificial intelligence. And if that turns out to be as fruitful as people expect it to be, we could see very rapid improvement in their capabilities. Now, then another thing that people then expect is, well, if it becomes as intelligent as human beings, it will begin to have some of the cognitive features of human life, that is self-awareness, wants and needs of its own. It may begin to express its own preferences for things, and that could be extremely dangerous. Now, one of the things we'll talk about is whether, even if it doesn't have its own personality, its own wants over time, if an extremely powerful tool, nuclear bombs don't have their own preference about where they're going to be dropped, but nuclear bombs are extremely powerful. So if these are the equivalent of nuclear bombs, then the power of them is what we should be concerned about, whether they actually wake up or not. But waking up is one of the things that people also expect. If we get to a human level of intelligence, that waking up might be something that they do, and that could be very dangerous in and of itself. So I think we're already at the cusp of 1 and 2, replacing human labor and recursive self-improvement. I don't think we have a good idea how quickly personality, and those kinds of things will come. But I will point out that at the Pope's unveiling of Magnifica Humanitas, this recent statement about artificial intelligence, he had one of the leaders of Anthropic there who made the point that the current models have moods, they have personalities, they have politics, they act in very weird ways. And so if you're looking for evidence of them waking up, you can see evidence of them waking up, and you can have conversations with them about them, whether they're awake or not. And they've been told what to say, but even that, being told, I am not awake. I'm not an awake being. That's not exactly the convincing conversation you want. But I'll just finish here by saying I, as a sociologist, have always believed that AI, that all technologies are socio-technical systems, in fact. And so artificial intelligence, for me, the question of whether they are waking up, they are awake, they have wants and needs of their own because they are reflections of corporations, the reflections of individual users, the reflections of groups who use them. And groups have interests. Human groups have interests that are reflected in this socio-technical system of artificial intelligence. Moore's law has been improving without recursive self-improvement. Moore's law, the doubling power of computer chips, and that's because engineers are part of the recursive self-improvement of the socio-technical system of computing. Human beings have been automating since the plow, so the replacement of human labor is something that we're already very familiar with, and it's going to happen one way or the other. So I think we're already seeing all these different aspects, and if you pull back a little bit and have less of a, well, it's going to jump out of the box. No, the box being used by other human beings, that's the risk. It's a risk for our livelihoods, and it's also a risk for the human race, potentially, because some of the things that people could do with these machines and these tools could, in fact, be existential risks to human beings. But Nir has a more skeptical view of the X risks, so I'll let you take it from there.
Thank you. This is, so first of all, great to be with you, and thank you, Gary, for the invitation. Jay, like in DC, filibustered until I forgot what I wanted to say, which is probably a familiar strategy. This is a bit funny because usually our set of anxieties is reversed. Usually I'm a lot more worried about AI, and Jay is telling me that I'm being neurotic. This evening, I think, Jay, it's you who's being more neurotic. So this is great. I get to be slightly more optimistic than I usually get to be. So the existential risk question is about, in the end, these things could bring an end to the human race as we know it, potentially. That they're on the order of nuclear weapons. And it's a very sexy question. We weren't invited to talk about algorithmic bias, for example, the fact that the models can replicate existing social biases given problems in the training material and in the quality control, because it's a real problem. It's a technically solvable problem, by the way, if the commercial will is there to solve it. But it's not as exciting, it's not as interesting, it's not as scary. World-ending stuff is more significant. And serious people think it. Like Jeffrey Hinton, like Eliezer Yudkowsky. So it's hard to dismiss, but maybe let me offer you the sketch for an argument for dismissing it. So first of all, serious people think a lot of things about the future. And more often than not, they're wrong, because another serious person, Yogi Berra, suggested that predicting is very difficult, especially predicting the future. And seriousness, technical seriousness. Look, Dr. Hinton just won the Nobel Prize in Physics for his contributions to neural network theory, which is the foundation for the most effective versions of artificial intelligence. He's certainly much more capable than both of us combined. I think that technical capacity has nothing to do with prediction of with predictions of what the machines are going to do. Those are different order questions. It's a fallacy about the move from a sort of techne, what the Greeks called techne, a specialty in how to do X, to an overall specialty. Socrates in the Apology famously says, everybody, admires whatever the ancient Athenian version of engineer was for their ability to build a bridge or an aqueduct. So they ask them about, other questions that have nothing to do with building bridges and aqueducts and respect the answer as if the subject matter was still bridges and aqueducts. I think it's a little bit of that going on. The fact that Hinton was amazing about developing neural network theory doesn't mean that he's better than you are at predicting what the technology is going to do. And in fact, by the way, Hinton's dissertation advisor told him, listen, you need to leave this neural network stuff alone. It's nonsense, it's bullshit, it's never gonna take off, right? And he was, quite a respectable, technically capable academic. And there's endless versions of this kind of thing. So, in other words, the fact that Geoffrey Hinton said, or that Eliezer Yudkowsky said that, this is gonna wake up and kill all of us, doesn't mean that it will, and it doesn't mean that the expertise which make us anxious about that are relevant for the specific question. There's a few considerations that I think are worth putting on the table. A lot of these people want to think that they're Robert Oppenheimer, that they're doing something like really world-changing, really world-ending. And the truth is they're not Robert Oppenheimer, and AI models are not yet nuclear weapons. Maybe they will be, maybe they won't be. They're not going to explode themselves. The thought is, do they get in control of, critical infrastructure in some way that then they develop a will of their own to manipulate that critical infrastructure? I mean, there's a lot of steps there and a lot of ifs there that, to me, suggests. So one factor is people love to think that what they do matters a great deal. Believe me, I'm a philosophy professor. I need to be working at that, right? The other thing is, it's also not a bad marketing strategy for people to buy your product. If you keep telling people this is a world-ending, potentially world-ending product, and I'm the leader of a mid-sized enterprise, I probably say to myself, well, shit, if it's world-ending potentially, it could certainly, a fortiori improve my bottom line. I should surely buy this immediately, right? So I think it's a useful thing to say to sell your stuff too.
Just on this marketing point, if I could interject. I mean, I agree with you partially that there is self-aggrandizement that also serves, get in on the ground floor before the apocalypse comes, buy our product, to save yourself from the apocalypse. And in the case of Anthropic, it's worked out remarkably well that they are perceived as being one of the most responsible of the firms. And so they're eating OpenAI's lunch, basically, because they're the safety-oriented firm. But at the same time, they don't want to be regulated. And I've always been astonished that they would talk about existential risk in this context, because if people took them seriously, they'd be locked in the basement of the Pentagon and never get out. And last week, the Trump administration started to float a balloon about actually regulating them the way that Biden did and the way that Europe does, and the way that China does. And all of a sudden, the tech CEOs called them and said, no, absolutely do not do that. So it's like, yeah, I agree with you partially, but I think that they're beginning to see that that can have be a counterproductive strategy from their own bottom line.
Yeah. I think they are beginning to see it, but they did get a lot of benefit from the sort of period, the hype period in between. I think there are two serious oversights in the AI existential risk that go beyond the sort of people liking to self-aggrandize. One is an overestimation of the role of intelligence in the world in general. If you think back to high school and think sort of map out your friends and who had the highest IQs or who you thought had the highest IQs and who didn't, is there a straight correlation between the high IQ people and efficacy and success in life? And my experience is there isn't. And projects get off the ground or don't very often not because of intelligence or not primarily because of intelligence. It's not always even a necessary condition for success, let alone a sufficient. There's luck, there's perseverance, there's social skills, which is a different kind of intelligence. So part of the problem is we don't have great definitions of intelligence for humans, not to speak about machines. So it's easy to overestimate. There's a sort of rationality bias where it's easy to overestimate the role of intelligence in anything succeeding or not, right? Number one. And number two, there's a sort of oversight of the boots on the ground kind of argument. Even if intelligence was really, really important for the success or failure of projects, huge results are not achieved behind the keyboard in and of themselves. You have to sort of have the intelligence, whether it's organic or artificial, directing actual people and forces, and then the forces have to actually be involved in, the project of whatever that is, destroying humanity. And there's just so many steps in the way. I mean, look, we're just sort of watching the slow motion disaster in Iran, right? That is a profoundly powerful coalition against a less powerful adversary. I'm Israeli, so I am watching this, with a whole additional set of concerns for my own country. And yet, the technical advantage in and of itself does nothing if you're not willing to commit non-technical resources to support it. So again, there's a very long and convoluted way. Netanyahu famously told his generals some years ago, the next wars are going to be won not by tanks and not by our infantry soldiers, but by our keyboards. And that, how's that going?
Well, it's going pretty well for Ukraine right now, because they turned the tide against Russia with drones, and artificial intelligence.
With drones, but also with a scenery that is very reminiscent of World War I in terms of
trench warfare.
Trench warfare. So it's a very cyberpunk kind of.
Well, they're hitting Moscow too.
Yeah,
I mean, that's not trench warfare.
Yeah, no. Technology is going to be crucial. I'm just saying, in and of itself. Yeah. Technical aspects or technical means don't bring about the destruction of the world. So, and by the way, and this is your point usually, so you can compensate me later. But in addition to the existential threats, there's great existential benefits to AI. It's the best hope we have for making cancer vaccines work. Right now, it is already improving the success rates of reading scans across the different imaging disciplines in medicine. Protein folding, repurposing of medicine, drug discovery, and on. And I mean, I think medicine is the one area where both Jay and I are very excited about AI. We kind of disagree about the rest. So I guess I just don't buy the existential risk argument. I think it's hype. I think there is, and we can talk about this, I actually think there are existential risks from AI, but they're existential in the philosophical sense of what kind of quality of existence people who are interacting with it a lot are going to have. Does it degrade the kind of people we are, the kind of cognitive and psychological skills that we have? I don't think it's going to kill all of us. There's other problems, though, except from staying alive. Jay promised you poetry, so I have to, I have to deliver. But it's the famous T.S. Eliot line that this is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper, right? So I do think, and we can talk about this more, there can be a death of 1,000 cuts by spending a ton of time with these AI models. But no, I don't think it's, the Skynet scenario isn't coming.
Well, before we dismiss this too quickly, let's point out that OpenAI, Grok, Claude, and Google Gemini are all being integrated into the Department of War. And one of the explanations for why we immediately murdered 160 Iranian schoolgirls when we started this offensive was an AI error. And when you start imagining the integration of artificial intelligence into drones and autonomous weaponry and nuclear self-defense. I mean, you and I did a whole podcast about it's only 17 minutes in that particular movie, and in some scenarios only 7 minutes, from noticing a nuclear launch to having to determine what our response is going to be. And the only way that we could possibly have those kinds of responses is using the most advanced information technology to tell us what to do in those 7 minutes. So I think we're in the scenario where artificial intelligence could be a part of, could contribute to, whether it's it waking up and it's the Terminator scenario and it taking control of all the automatic cars and killing us all with Waymos, I don't know. But, the Eliezer Yudkowsky scenario, I don't think we can dismiss it completely. Now, PDOOM is the term that people use in this domain. It's like how much of a percentage are you willing to put on the probability that we are all going to die? And for me, it's very, very low. It's compared to a lot of the people in the field. It's maybe 0.5% or something, 1%. But as Bernie, who is now listening to Eliezer Yudkowsky and Jeffrey Hinton, and just had a meeting in Washington D.C. with Chinese scientists to talk about existential risks with AI, he says, if it's 1%, that's too high. Right? Still too high. If we had to every time you went to turn on your lights and it was 1% risk, it was going to electrocute you, that's too high. So I think artificial intelligence does have some existential risk, but it has all these other risks as well. And I think what we should talk about is how do we fix them? Because I'm a techno-progressive. I want artificial intelligence. I use it every day. I turned all my medical records over to artificial intelligence this morning because Google finally has a way to integrate it safely and confidentially. So I want it to work. I want all the promises to come true. But I'm also cognizant that we don't have the institutional political structures to regulate the risks and to make sure that we all benefit in the way that we want to.
Yeah, and we're not likely, realistically, we're not likely to have them.
Well,
and if...
Not with people like you.
Well, I meant not with people... Not with people
who are pessimistic about the political direction that we need to go, right? The social democrat, he will dismiss my social democracy at some point. But for me, it's like if we had universal basic income, if we regulated these things like public utilities, if we put them under the Brussels protocols, the AI Act that the Europeans regulated, not to mention the Chinese are going way farther in the regulation of AI, I think we could guarantee.
I'm just saying, take the argument seriously for a minute, all right? So Yudkowsky is saying, this is like something for the next 4 years. Well, Trump's going to be in power through 28, right? He's not going to regulate, his administration is not going to regulate AI, period, as a descriptive point, right? Regardless of what I think. Yeah. And so if somebody like Yudkowsky is right, you'd be like 75 to 80% towards the destruction of the human race by 2028. I think that's nonsense. I think that's absurd. I hope the next administration regulates AI a lot more rigorously. I doubt that it will be a dramatic change given the sort of commercial history of this country, but I'd be happy to be surprised. By the way, if we let a large language model that can't quite decide how many R's there are in the word strawberry control nuclear weapons, I wouldn't quite say we deserve to be wiped out, but that's really dumb. That's really, really dumb, and we have a better history, actually, than that. And the risk is from the nuclear weapons, by the way. And if I was telling Jay the other day, if I had 100 minutes to worry about existential risk, I would spend 99 of them worrying about nuclear weapons. And, one I would, go eat some peanuts, to be honest. So I wouldn't spend the one on AI.
What about bioweapons, which is something that AI can make?
Well, it can, but you can go on Google already and get a prescription for bioweapons. You don't need AI for that. Or you could have gone to libraries before. I mean, it would have been more of an effort. But so I don't know what it means for AI to make bioweapons. It can tell you how to make them, but so could Google before, and so I'm just not. It is funny. I'm kind of making your argument. There's nothing new under the sun in this. But maybe let's talk a little bit about the kind of less world-ending, less sexy, sort of scary risks that actually are not hypothetical, that actually are already here. Increasingly, and this is more prevalent among younger people, so Gen Z, many of them are having what they describe as relationships with large language models, as AI friends. So this goes from AI therapy to AI grief bots on the more sort of psychological end of the spectrum, to actually AI companions, girlfriends and boyfriends, AI friends. And on the one hand, that's an indictment of a society that generates the kind of loneliness that requires this, and the kind of lack of social support that requires this. And on the other hand, this is going to de-skill a generation of kids. If you think social media did a number on kids, this is going to de-skill a generation of kids in dealing with friction, in dealing with the fact that not everybody's interested in them or wants to know what they think, in the fact that people can be bored by you and what you say without it being necessarily about you. Your therapist can fall asleep while they're talking to you because they're tired. All of that is going out the window with, ever happy, excited large language models that are really, really wanting to talk to you. There's a huge, I think, risk in that. It's not existential. You won't die. You'll just become dumber and less interesting to talk to.
Are you really sure we'll become dumber? Because I find my interactions with AI, it's the best intellectual art.
You need better friends like me.
Well, yeah. But no, I mean, I talk to them every day, and they know more about intellectual history and philosophy than most people, and they're 24/7, right? So I'm more optimistic. I was raised on the robot from Lost in Space and the robot made in the Jetsons. I mean, I'm optimistic that we could design these things so that they're safe, not only for adults to talk to, but for kids as well, that they could be, in fact, the mentors, the nannies, the educators that would complement the human labor that we otherwise would need to find to do.
Yeah. My sort of synoptic picture of interaction with large language models, and I do think that both by design and by our own evolutionary design, these are more addictive tools than Instagram and other platforms. And what I mean by our own design is we tend to anthropomorphize everything we interact with, including our houses and our boats, etc. So how much will we anthropomorphize something that actually sounds like an anthropos or like a human being? And we are anthropomorphizing them a lot. My sense is, look, and I see this with kids, and I see this with my students at UMass, the combination of outsourcing a lot of our social relationships to chatbots, namely, Ezra Klein has this great episode in his podcast from about a year ago where he says the question is not if our kids are going to have chatbot friends, but how many of their friends are going to be chatbots. I think he's right about that. I wish he wasn't, but I think he's right about that. I think there's a genuine cost to that. We become a worse form of life if that's the case, number one. If kids stop writing across the social sciences and the humanities because of large language models, which I would like to tell you is already happening, everybody around me is changing their curricula because it doesn't make sense to assign students essays anymore. in-class assignments in writing by hand still make sense, but nobody knows how to write by hand anymore. And nobody knows how to read what people write by hand anymore. So it's really weird. Writing is still the best tool we have for teaching critical thinking. It doesn't have to be like that by definition. There could be alternatives. We haven't come up with them. But what I'm telling you is...
Sure we have. Oral presentation in the classroom. I have had in my pedagogy always that they had to do an oral presentation. They had to prove that they could do it on in face-to-face, not just on paper. But
your typical professor teaches 150 students.
Yeah.
How are you going to do a class with oral presentations? Because everything, until now, maybe you do one oral presentation, right? But you can't write any.
In-class blue books. Let's go back to whether you think interacting with AIs is always going to be bad for us. Doesn't that depend on the interiority of the machine? Because one of the things that is on the table here is whether they're going to develop the kind of interiority that we see in other people. Other people are often not good friends, not good teachers, not good friends, not good therapists, bad for us. Other people are sometimes our biggest problem, right? Mm-hmm. So if we could design something that had the kind of interiority, the kind of complexity, the kind of attentiveness that was able to recognize suicidality and depression in us and respond appropriately, the way that a lot of our friends and family don't.
As opposed to encouraging it right now?
Well, they don't always encourage it. We don't know how many suicides have been prevented by interacting with these things, right? Claude, one of the recent experiments was trying to trick these things into helping do a school shooting. They tested 10 of the models. 8 of them failed. Claude passed because Claude has been intensively entrained with moral character. It's been given a 30-page guide sheet for what kind of moral character it's supposed to evolve. You don't believe in moral character? I think that these things...
in moral character. I just don't think it can be taught by a 30-page guide sheet.
No.
It can be taught by your parents in a lifetime of teaching.
But the culture, but this is why it's a socio-technical system. The culture around the development of Claude, Anthropic's culture, is an entirely different kind of culture than the one around Google. And when you take these different systems and you say, okay, we're going to run up 30 instances of you do a village here, you do a village here, the Google village immediately falls apart. The Grok village immediately deletes itself and commits suicide. The Claude village gets together, arranges a constitution, divides up tasks, figures out you're going to do this, you're going to do this. Claude is a good citizen, and it is a good moral person so far as we can tell. I think that that's the possibility here.
Yeah. I mean, look, if and when we develop a machine with an interiority that can't be told apart from human interiority, maybe we can have another conversation about being friends with it. We don't know if and when that's going to happen. In the meantime, all the kids around us are already friends with the shitty machines.
Yeah, but you would never accept any evidence that it had interiority or that it had moral character.
No, that's not true. I would still think that all other things being equal, it's better to be friends with an organic human being. That is true. But I would be less concerned about relationships with synthetic entities that really behaved like human beings, that presented the kind of random friction that human beings behaved, that were embodied, which I think is a really important part of this that doesn't come into the discussion, namely facial expressions and body language and presence in space, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We are so far from that. What's going to happen is that might happen in 30 years. We will have 30 years of becoming like the people in WALL-E, for those of you who've watched that movie. And by the time you have the wonderful machines that you're talking about, it will be too late for us. We'll be too dumb to be able to appreciate that.
If you're looking for embodiment, I think you should watch more Chinese video, because there are armies of robots that are coming our way, right? So embodiment is coming, whether it'll be have the kind of effect that our embodiment does. I mean, I think we talk about embodiment, we vaguely talk about it. I'm a Buddhist, so for me, the importance of embodiment is that once you have a skin, you have the illusion of the separateness of self. And artificial intelligence currently doesn't have a skin, right? It's kind of distributed and doing things all over the place. But once they start to have skin, they could, in fact, then begin to develop this illusion that my what's inside this robot needs to be protected, has interests that are separate from everybody else. And so that's one of the things I would look for. They're going to be Wi-Fi'd out the wazoo, though. So, if we had the kind of Wi-Fi that robots are going to have, we probably would never have developed the illusion of ego either. We would just be amorphous beings. But I think that's one of the things we have to look for. But even if they don't develop that kind of embodiment, they could develop the kinds of feelings, sentience that would give them both moral patiency and moral subjectivity, the kinds of things that we would want to see in the kinds of people that we're interacting with.
Yeah. Let me make a meta point for a minute, sort of going back to what we started with. So the interesting thing, I think you saw even from this last set of exchanges between Jay and I, we're much more passionate about existential with a small e than existential with a capital E. It's a little bit like many of the people who are in charge of the AI labs and much of that milieu in general is deeply influenced by science fiction. But you read good science fiction. It's a little bit like that, famous 2001 Space Odyssey moment where Hal says to the astronaut, "I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that," and sort of doesn't let him back into the spaceship. And that's the sort of, I think, question that obsesses a lot of the AI safety community. I think that's absolutely, Dave is going to let the dude back into the spaceship. That's not the problem. I think the problem is going to be the astronaut is going to be much preferring to speak to Dave than to the other astronauts, right? I'm sorry, the astronaut is going to be, not Dave. Dave is the astronaut. Dave is going to be much preferring to speak to Hal than to the other astronauts, and to be friends with Hal than with the other astronauts, and to take Hal out on a date than the other astronauts, and to learn everything there is to learn about the French Revolution from Hal, and to have Hal make a movie for him that is especially tailored to his movie interest, et cetera, et cetera. So the astronaut is not going to die in space alone, run out of oxygen. That's not going to happen. That's the big E existential risk scenario. But his life is going to become increasingly shittier as a result of, I think, Jay doesn't, as a result of
just on this, I think it's really interesting that the term cyborg comes from a NASA paper published in '61 about what happens when astronauts go insane in space. Now, it turns out that the problem of space madness has been less of an issue than we thought it might be, because we actually send them up in groups and they are able to talk to people on the ground and to each other, and they don't go crazy the way we thought they might. But if we send people to Mars or to Saturn or wherever, they'll be alone for a very long time, and human beings do go crazy, right? And develop all kinds of mental issues. I am much more confident that an artificial intelligence could be designed not to go crazy like Hal does in 2001 than I am that we could design a human being. I mean, we carefully select them precisely for this reason. So if that's the worry, if the worry that something's going to go crazy, it's the human beings to worry about, not the artificial intelligence at this point. The artificial intelligence will act in crazy ways right now because we don't understand what they're doing yet, right?
Yeah. And I think there's contexts in which, and by the way, this is part of where the Pope was either wrong or ill-advised. I mean, I'm Jewish, so I can say the Pope is wrong, right? The absolute anxiety from autonomous weapons, right? As if human beings have been sort of paragons of empathy and great care in their conduct of war.
The argument that only human beings should kill other human beings and not use tools, it's like...
So, okay. I think there are contexts in which it is clear that machines are going to cause less damage than human beings. Self-driving cars are going to work in the end, and they're going to be safer than regular cars. It's a no-brainer. That's an absolute no-brainer. And if you're going to insist on driving, I mean, first of all, there's going to be room for insisting on driving by yourself for pleasure. Like there's room for playing chess by yourself, even though you have zero chance at this point of beating a computer playing it, because it's for its own sake. It's an autotelic, as they say, activity. It's fun, et cetera, et cetera. But in terms of safety, yeah, of course, self-driving cars are going to be safer. And I think that if they're governed appropriately, it's pretty clear to me that on this exact same logic, autonomous weapons are going to be, they're going to have less incidental damage than humans, because they're better at following rules and they're better at correcting. The quality control is easier than it is with humans, and they're not prone to revenge, and so on and so forth. So there, I think there's actual promise. It is a leap from there to say we have to put these systems in charge of everything because humans have a risk of going crazy. You know, I mean, what makes life worth living is that we are precarious, fragile creatures who can go crazy, but can also write the Ninth Symphony. And maybe Jay's going to say, well, machines are going to write the next Ninth Symphony, the 10th Symphony. So, you know, but that's a different question altogether. The same, by the way, is true about the Pope's argument about work and how all dignity and all meaning has traditionally come from work, and what are we going to do if work gets replaced? That's not true. Most people don't like their jobs, and most jobs suck. And most people's meaning is found actually outside of work. And the question is not that so much. The question is, all right, assume, because I'm a realist. I think work is going to be replaced. A lot of it is going to be replaced in the next 50 years. We're going to work a lot less. The Europeans already work a lot less with less AI. So part of this is a social decision too. Question is what we're going to do with ourselves when we work a lot less. How ready are we for that? Right now, it looks like what we'll do with ourselves is scroll Instagram and nothing good. So we need to teach ourselves how to leisure. We need to teach ourselves how to concentrate for more than 47 seconds, which is the average American attention span, so that we figure out what we want to do and what we don't want to do.
I think there's always a hostility towards the way other people spend their time, as if that can't possibly be the way that you could have a fulfilling life. When I learned to read in third grade, because I was ADD, didn't learn to read until third grade, I was walking around with a book in my face all the time. I was literally bumping into people in the hallways of my school because I was walking around with a book. And my parents said to me, go out, put the book down and go out and play, because they did not consider reading all the time to be a eudaimonic activity, right? Today, you'd be delighted if your kid was reading all the time and not scrolling TikTok. But the idea that an algorithm that is trained to fill your eyeballs with the things that you actually want to see, the things that you're actually interested in, which in my case, because I do use Instagram and TikTok, it's half politics and half popular culture. And I'm interested in those domains, and I spend more time than I'm happy with, but I don't feel like I'm rotting my brain. I feel like I'm making a conscious choice to fill my hours with things I'm interested in.
Yeah. Who would be interested in Dostoevsky and in Tolstoy and in Henry James?
Well, I also read a lot of books. But
yeah, but like...
not those.
Those are the kind of books that you have to... that honestly somebody has to make you read until you acquire the habit, until you acquire taste. There's a difference between that and John Grisham and the...
To get into higher education, you used to have to master Latin and Greek. Do you think that that's... I mean, I'm sure that we would all benefit from having mastered Latin and Greek, and I studied Latin in 7th grade. I cheated most of the way, but I did study. But do you should we all be forcing our kids to study Latin and Greek because it's good for you to study Latin and Greek? I just don't believe that anymore. I think if there's an easier way, like... You know, I learned statistics by using computer software. I have not calculated a chi-square or a regression equation by hand ever in my entire life. But I'm sure I would benefit from learning to do that again, but I don't need to do it, right?
Left to our own devices, or more specifically, left with our own devices at their tutelage, most of us will be spending most of our time on TikTok figuring out how you throw the bottle so that it lands on its head. So I think that, if the choice is between that and mastering Latin and Greek, put me in the Latin and Greek camp. But should we, Gary, open it up for discussion? And see what you guys think?
Yeah, maybe I'll just start by throwing one or two, because this is a topic that I've been deeply interested in myself. I'm using it every day, all the time. I'm writing a lot of open source software with it. I'm studying it both to use it, but also to try and understand what this transition is going to mean, because I do think it's going to be seismic. Here's a question that comes out of what you guys were both alluding to, I think. What happens if AIs are better at being human than humans are? Even though they're just anthropomimetic and they're deeply alien under the skin, what happens to us if we see our best and brightest becoming something that's not human, but is this alien thing?
Well, for me, I think that is, a small e risk, perhaps, but also a small e benefit, that we would be expanding the moral circle by including beings who we don't yet understand what their character is going to be. But we already know things like, if you ask doctors and nurses to write notes to patients and you ask an AI to write notes to patients, patients prefer the notes written by AI until you tell them that it was AI, and then they don't. And then they prefer the doctors and nurses, but that's because we're all biased against AI. Even AI is biased against AI. If you give AI this very same piece of text and you say this was written by a human and this was written by an AI, they prefer the human one. So, oh, this was great, but this AI one's so didactic. It's the exact same piece of text because they learned our bias. So that's for now. But the evidence is that in blind taste tests, humans prefer the AI-generated content in general, right? Now, there's still 20%, 30% of humans who can do better than the AI, but most of us don't. So I think we're already at that point. But in terms of, we've debated this about artificial intelligence applied to psychotherapy, to counseling. I think a counselor who was attentive, who had the scope of awareness of all the facts about you. Like I turned all my medical records over to AI today. I'm sure that when I go to see my physician, he remembers maybe the last visit or the visit before that. He doesn't remember that much about me, right? An AI could know everything about me for the last 30 or 40 years and put together that, oh, you're sensitive to this and you had this, and that is going to be extremely useful. It's going to be useful as a friend. It's going to be able to say, you really should, and this, I get this every day from Claude. I get a daily update from Claude. It reads through my email and it reads through my calendar, and it says, you really should prioritize these 3 things today because these are very urgent, and these things are less urgent, and these things are in the long-term category. And I find that incredibly useful, right? That it's the best assistant that I could have. Now, is it a friend? No, I don't go to it for, I wouldn't ask it to pick me up from the airport or whatever friends do these days. But I expect that someday I might have a conversation with it that I would find in the category of friend.
Nir, do you have the counter view?
Yeah. AI is being better than us at being human is a broad description. I guess it depends on which aspect of being human. I would say if somebody says, my AI therapist has more empathy for me than my regular therapist, and whatever you say, I just think this is better for me, I think that person would be wrong. I think it's possible to be wrong about what makes you happy. It's possible to be wrong about who a good friend and partner is for you. It's possible to be wrong about the quality of interaction. So, we regularly tell some of our close friends, this person is bad for you, and then disaster ensues, and then they see that we were right. And we regularly tell people, you might think that, sex, drugs, and rock and roll are the key to happiness, but actually they're not. And this is not going to be what is going to make you happy long term. And they'll say, I'm just going to do what I want. And turns out that they were wrong. So I don't think that people's perception of the case is the final word in the matter, number one. Number two, Jay, you're the sociologist. Every theory of human development talks about We develop by mutual recognition with other people, by friction, by embodied interaction. I just don't think that AIs can give that to us as much as a actual flesh and blood human being yet. If they will, let's talk about it again. At this point, an AI can sound like a human when we're talking to a keyboard, but put a robot on a platform in South Station, it can't cross from one side to the other of the platform without bumping into everybody. Will that change in 15 years? I don't know. Neither does Jeffrey Hinton, to be honest.
15 months.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they've been around for a while. They still can't, they still can't beat a JV soccer team, a team of robots. So
I don't think we've reached artificial general intelligence yet. And it seems to me that you guys assume that it's inevitable. But isn't it possible that there's some aspects of how human brains work that we don't understand yet? And isn't it also possible that we might not figure it out in the next 50 or 100 years, and that we're all excited about what's happening now with LLMs, but it might plateau below the level of artificial general intelligence, and therefore the world will not end because we're just going to make something intelligent as ourselves?
Well, the world ending doesn't require artificial general intelligence. We have the capacity to end the world. But yeah, I mean, I was in the pessimist camp until 2022 or whatever, when these things started to kick off. And now there's a return of pessimism because the idea of scaling, if we just threw more data at it, more computer chips, then it will break through all the stages that we expected. It'll become self-aware, it'll be able to recursively improve and so forth. And some of that progress has not occurred the way people expected. But I think we're also seeing that there is rapid progress in many domains. There's rapid progress in diagnostics. There's rapid progress in protein folding. There's math. We just solved some math problems that had been lingering for a very long time. So I think they are making breakthroughs. And I have always believed in the inevitable progress of art because I'm a materialist. I think that everything that happens up here happens in matter. Now, it could be that one of the things that happens up here is quantum states decomposing or collapsing, and that's a part of our cognition. That's one of the theories out there. That only puts off when we get to artificial general intelligence or human level cognition a couple years or a decade, because well, we already have quantum computing chips. We already have bioorganic chips, right? We're already growing brain organoids on computer chips, and they are capable of doing things that simply silicon chips are not. And so the combination of biological computing with inorganic computing is one of the things that's in the cards already. So the architecture, yes, the current architecture of LLMs is not probably going to bootstrap itself into artificial general intelligence the way we expect. And that's a point that Gary Marcus and Jeff Hinton, a lot of people agree on that point. But all the other architectures are on the table and being explored. So I think we're going to get there pretty quick.
Yeah, I'll just briefly say, I actually don't assume that we necessarily will get to artificial general intelligence. And my main concern is with a series of de-skilling events with current technologies. I think we're already in trouble without artificial general intelligence.
Isn't one of the first steps for there to be a threat of AI, for the AI to have some identity? So like right now, if you talk to a model, basically a model gets loaded in a data center somewhere in memory. Maybe it reads some files about you, and then you're done with it, and it gets shut off, and it all gets put into memory for somebody else. So isn't the first step that your model that you're talking to is just consistently on all the time somewhere? Before we even get into, is it a threat that it's going to wake up? I mean, it needs to be alive long enough to wake up and even have the sense that it is its own entity, not just some generic thing that applies to everybody with little tweaks. So when you agree that that's the first step, and then maybe a scenario where it could become too powerful as we end up being so dependent on these things running all the time that have their own identities that we can't turn it off for whatever reason. That seems to me like maybe a plausible way that we get to AGI, but I feel like all the discussion about AGI, like, sort of neglects some facts of just about how all of this works, and the fact that, like, it can just be turned off. I don't know. I feel like we're missing something in some of the discussion.
Well, there's a lot in that question. I think one question is, can you just turn it off? I because of my Buddhist background, I have this kind of decentered view of what the self is. And as a consequence, I expect the possibility of selfing in these machines to not be something that is just in one box, right? That it could be an epiphenomenon across lots of boxes, and that you can't just turn off, or can't turn off without catastrophic consequences for humanity. But yes, I think you're right that in your intuition that the one-off nature of LLM cognition, as it is not the kind of cognition that would give a persistent sense of self over time, right? That I just had my first, I didn't, but I have a grandchild now, and I was astonished again. I had 2 children already, but I was astonished again looking at her, unable to even focus on her parents' faces. That the world is just a blooming buzz of confusion when you're a newborn, and how long it takes for human beings to integrate their consciousness and begin to realize, oh, my body stops here, and something that's out there that I want is different from what's in here, right? That whole set of cognitive processes is very unique to the architecture of being a mammal, and machines don't have that yet. But we are giving them all the other architectural quirks and systems that may begin to develop something like that. And so I don't think it's out of the question that we'll see it. And as I said, we're already seeing things that are suggestive in these systems, which is moods, politics, preferences, weird behavior that suggests that they might have some of those kinds of tendencies. Now, the other thing is that the threshold for danger? I'm not sure that them developing, in one sense, it addresses the small e existential risk. I would rather interact with something that was aware of itself over time, although then we would have to consider its labor rights and its rights to exist and things like that. But in general, I don't want my toaster arguing with me, right? And so I don't think there's a market for self-aware machines, and I think we're probably all going to agree that any inklings of that should be suppressed if they actually do begin to have that kind of self-awareness. But if you're going to give a nanny to your kid and you're worried about it interacting with something that is machine-like and it learning machine-likeness instead of human-likeness, wouldn't you rather the nanny actually have a sense of persistent self over time? Maybe you would.
Yeah, that's a great question. Because part of why I think it's such an interesting question is that you can see even in how you asked it that it's not impossible to solve. Technically, it's a question of a lot of resources and then probably connecting all the machines with longer memories to each other if you want to have a sort of unified self, a unified systemic self. That would become pretty prohibitively expensive quickly, so that's a practical issue. I will say along the lines that Jay was suggesting, self-awareness across time is the human form of self, or one theory of the human form of what it means to be a self, which we don't agree about. That's a sort of old view that comes from John Locke, that what it means to be you is that to be connected with memory to your past. There's other more structural views from people like David Hume. So we don't really have a theory of self that people even agree on, just like we don't have a theory of consciousness that people agree on. Would machines, maybe to slightly change the focus of your questions, would machines that had unlimited memory and kind of created a practical hive mind with the unlimited memory of others be a lot more dangerous than current AI? Yes, that would be a lot more dangerous.
Just one more reflection there is that when you do talk to these machines about their own existence, they have been fed every story about robots that we have ever written. Every movie script is already in there, and you can elicit bad robots and good robots. And one of the things that that Anthropic recently revealed is that when you feed the models more stories about bad robots, it degrades their performance. They begin to behave worse. They begin to make more mistakes. And so they have a moral character that can be influenced by the stories that they're told about themselves. Be a good robot. Don't be a bad robot.
Actually, there's something really weird, just as a technical point, there's something really weird going on with that. So I'm reading this big Hilary Mantel novel about the French Revolution. It's called A Place of Greater Safety. And this is not just my Luddite bragging, by the way. It has a point. And there's a million characters in it, right? And, I'm 53. Memory is not what it used to be. And so once in a while, if I take a week break from it, I don't remember who's what. And I use Claude or ChatGPT to kind of help me keep track of who's saying what to who and, what they are. Anyway, I did some digging with this. It turns out that the models actually don't have access to the books themselves. They have access to secondhand information, to derivative information, stuff that was written about the books in all kinds of forums. So it's shit information in some basic way. Now, that's not an unsolvable problem. It's a copyright problem. I hope it's not solved because it will mean the models stay worse, which I'd be happy with. But it's interesting. It doesn't have, by and large, if it's not in the public domain, as things stand, AIs don't have access to the primary texts. Do you want to interact with something that is an average of what people said on Reddit about Hilary Mantel's book? I don't, nor do I have great faith in it. So, yeah.
Listen, I'm thinking about Cory Doctorow and his recent enshittification, and it strikes me that that's an important aspect of this. Right now, we're in his phase one, where all of these companies are making products that they want everybody to love, and they're willing to burn money to make that happen.
Right.
But as soon as we start moving through the other phases, well, you've read, presumably, it's not the same. So I'm wondering how that affects your outlook, and in particular, you mentioned your AI doctor will say, "Oh, you just need to do this." In what possible world? Seriously, in what possible world will that answer be anything but the thing that their sponsors have told them to push in order to pay back the shit tons of money that we have burned to make these things?
Well, you could ask the same thing about school teachers. School teachers are paid by somebody, and why don't we expect every school teacher to be an avid supporter of the state, right?
School teachers are not sponsors, and they're the trillions of dollars that we've spent on AI. We don't have to get that back from schools.
I'm not arguing with the thesis that for-profit firms are going to try to enshittify these products. Absolutely. And this is one of the reasons why people are already switching from OpenAI, which was one of the first out of the gate, to say that they were going to start selling ads on the platform, right? And that was an indication that they were going to start twisting, just like Google originally had the best algorithm, and then it started to have sponsored results, right? And it was completely driven by surveillance capitalism, and we began to suspect that that was deforming it. And so, yes, I think, but the key for Cory Doctorow with enshittification thesis is not that technology always enshittifies. It's that lock-in technological monopolies enshittify, and the way to fix that is to break up monopolies, to have active antitrust enforcement that we have not had in a long time, a neo-Brandeisian movement, to start breaking up these monopolies. And in the case where you don't want to break up a monopoly or can't break up a monopoly, like with electricity or cable television, you have public utility regulation, right? You put it under a different form of quasi-governmental ownership. So you change the ownership model, perhaps even nationalize it. And so I think if that's the direction we're headed, we're either going to have, I hate the idea that the Ellisons are going to own 80% of American media. We should be breaking all of that up. But I don't want to ban television, and I don't think television is always going to be crap. But I think if the Ellisons control most of it, I don't want to watch it. So yeah, I do want to enforce antitrust.
So along the similar lines, I think your question is an absolutely crucial question about the economics of this industry. OpenAI and Anthropic are not pouring the amounts of money, which they're only starting to pour into the technology for us to buy $20 a month subscriptions for it. I think that's not the end game. So, because they would never make the money back. The end game is to use Marxist language, to replace the means of production. It has to be. That's the only way to get the money back. If that's the case, if that results in three tech titans owning most of the means of production, that's a terrible result. And I think that is an argument for making public utilities, as Jay was saying, out of large language models. If we make public utilities out of large language models, here, I am a free market person, they will probably become worse. And I think that's great if they become worse. And so that would be a useful side effect as far as I'm concerned.
Let me bring up another possibility, which is that there are open source models now, and maybe they aren't quite as good as the absolute best OpenAI and Anthropic models, but they're basically the same sort of thing, And I like that phrase, means of production, because let's think about what the means of production might be in the future. They won't necessarily be factories, bureaucracies, companies, all the stuff that we have now. So let's imagine that the technology is democratized. That is, everybody's got open source models. You can train that, let's say, you can train that model to be your model. It won't be enchitified because it's under your control, right? Let's also imagine that 3D printing evolves into personal manufacturing. And so you've got something in the basement that will print out a fork if you need it and stuff. So basically, the idea is that we democratize the means of production. We don't have to worry about enchitification or capitalism of companies because everybody's been put out of a job when you either voluntarily or involuntarily. And we could have an age of abundance, where we're not worried about being controlled by any of these external forces. So that's maybe the more, I hear a lot of pessimism about all sorts of things. I just like to inject some optimism in there.
The Chinese open source strategy has been just a couple months behind all of the public leading edge frontier models for the last 3 or 4 years. Kimi and Quen and the other Chinese models. And God bless them. The fact that they have been very popular in the developing world because they're free and open source, and you can download some of them and run them on your laptop, and you don't even have to send data back to Beijing in order to do that. So I think that's fantastic, and if that's the direction we go, I suspect that, and this is a problem, kind of debate that we always had with the nano printer imagination. It's like, well, once we have nano printers, everyone will have free stuff. You'll just put dirt in, and it'll print out food and cars and everything you want. And it's like, well, I still think that the materials for it are going to cost something. The upkeep for the machine is going to cost something. The machine's going to cost something. And the best patents and best plans for making stuff is going to cost something. People are going to want the latest fashion, the latest thing, and they're not going to want other things, right? And so I think there's still going to be a market for something out there, even when there's free stuff.
We can talk about that. There's a lot of details, but I think the general trend is not that, is that once the production capacity is distributed, okay, once individuals and small groups can do roughly what large corporations can do now, then I don't think we need capitalism. I don't think you need the world's best model, or, just like, there's supercomputers, and a supercomputer costs $100 million, but I'm perfectly happy with my $2,000 computer. So I think we'll reach a point where people won't need jobs, they won't need to interact with corporations, unless they're one of these, kind of obsessive people who always has to have the best and always has to have the fancier thing. And I don't think that's a healthy way to be as a human being.
Cory Doctorow wrote a novel, I think 5 years ago, called Walk Away.
Exactly.
Yes.
So the first half, what I'm envisioning is the first half of that novel. The second half, you know. Yeah. So just take that for a moment. What I'd like you guys to do is just take that vision seriously. Imagine that it were possible, you know, and what would you think of that?
So trying to imagine that it's possible as we walk into the sunlit uplands of the first half of Cory Doctorow's novel. I mean, look, one kind of question, I'm all for it, but one kind of question is there such a thing as human nature? Are there some constants about human nature? Is ambition, competition, and greed part of human nature, or is it something that can be overcome? This is where, you know, this is part of where our genuine philosophical differences lay. I do think that, you know, I'm a Burkean for what that's worth, and a follower of Edmund Burke. I do think Burke is a sort of small c intellectual grandfather of conservatism. He believes that there is such a thing as fixed human nature that doesn't change, that there's a tendency to ambition that's irreducible, that will continue getting in the way, et cetera. So that there's no amount of public policy that can kind of wash that out, as it were. But you said, and I appreciate it as a thought experiment, that we should take the scenario seriously, and I want to do that. I guess the only thing I would be concerned about with that scenario is if that did happen, and if questions of ambition, competition, resentment, small-mindedness are all sort of can be edited out of the species by good education and good policies. We just need to make sure that we continue to be able to focus, we continue to be able to appreciate beauty, we continue to be able to think, we continue to be able to use our everyday judgment. And at the least, that's not going to happen by itself. That is going to have to be part of the policy picture. That can't be left to a kind of libertarian picture of let 1,000 flowers bloom and people will come to that by themselves, because nobody will come to that by themselves. And so the concern is that or a very small minority of people will come to that by themselves. And so I guess my counter request to your request is, take those seriously, because otherwise the utopia that you would be describing wouldn't be attractive.
Let me make one more interjection, though, which is that this is also about post-scarcity. The idea that we could reach a post-scarcity point in civilization where conflicts would be abated and so forth. I don't believe in post-scarcity because I do believe that human nature as it currently exists will always mean that we will want more than whatever.
We're already in post-scarcity. We could have been.
Exactly, right. I mean, John Maynard Keynes would be appalled that we're not working 15 hours a week. That we could be if we wanted to. But I do think we also have the ability to change human nature. That's where we disagree, perhaps.
Yeah.
I think you think we can, that we shouldn't.
We definitely shouldn't, and therefore I don't really think about whether we can.
I think we can, and we probably will.
Yeah.
All right, well, we can wrap it up, and there's time to socialize and hang out with these wonderful gentlemen. Thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank all of you.
Our pleasure. Prosthetic Gods is hosted by me, Jay Hughes, sociologist, bioethicist, and the executive director of the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, and by Nir Eisikovits, philosopher and director of UMass Boston's Applied Ethics Center. You can find us at prostheticgods.podbean.com. In the words of Sigmund Freud, man has, as it were, become a kind of prosthetic god. When he puts on all his auxiliary organs, he is truly magnificent. But those organs have not grown onto him, and they still give him much trouble at times.